In the 1800s, every ship sailing between Europe and Asia had no choice. They had to round the southern tip of Africa, braving fierce storms, enormous swells, and weeks of open ocean with no port in sight. It was slow, dangerous, and expensive. Then, in 1869, the Suez Canal opened and changed everything. The Cape of Good Hope became a relic, a route for history books. But in 2026, the world's most modern container ships are quietly turning south again. Back to the Cape, back to the 19th century. And this time, it is not a lack of technology sending them there, it is missiles. To understand what's happening, you need to know about two narrow passages of water that together control a staggering share of global trade. The first is the Suez Canal and the Red Sea corridor, specifically a southern gateway called Bab el-Mandeb, a strait barely 30 kilometers wide that connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. Every year, roughly 15% of global trade passes through here. Thousands of container ships, tankers, and bulk carriers use it as the fast lane between Asia and Europe. The second is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow choke point at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, just 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Nearly 20% of the world's oil and a significant share of global LNG passes through here every single day. If Hormuz closes, energy markets worldwide feel it within hours. For decades, global trade was built on the assumption that both of these passages would always be open. That is now broken. The trouble didn't start overnight. Back in late 2023, Houthi militants in Yemen began attacking commercial vessels in the Red Sea, using drones and anti-ship missiles to target ships they deemed linked to Israel or Western interests. The attacks were frequent, accurate, and deeply alarming to shipping companies. By early 2024, most major container lines had already stopped using the Suez route entirely, diverting their ships around the Cape of Good Hope instead. Suez Canal revenues collapsed. Transit numbers fell by more than half. The industry adapted reluctantly and expensively to the longer route. Then, in 2025, there was cautious optimism. A ceasefire in Gaza eased some tensions. A handful of shipping lines began cautiously testing the Red Sea again. For a few months, it looked like the worst was over. It wasn't. By early 2026, security deteriorated sharply again. Then a new crisis arrived. Conflict involving Iran pushed the Strait of Hormuz itself into the danger zone. Major shipping lines, including Maersk, announced they were pausing Red Sea transits again, and they were also suspending passages through Hormuz entirely. Both corridors, simultaneously, were now off the table. For the first time in the modern era, ships had nowhere to go but south. Pull up a map, and the Cape route looks like a minor inconvenience. In reality, it is anything but. A standard Asia to Europe container ship sailing via the Suez Canal covers the route in roughly 27 to 30 days. Via the Cape of Good Hope, that same journey takes 36 to 45 days. That is an extra 3,000 to 4,000 nautical miles, an extra 8 to 14 days at sea, depending on the route and speed. J.P. Morgan has estimated that Cape diversions represent roughly a 30% increase in transit times and an effective 9% reduction in global container shipping capacity, not because there are fewer ships, but because the same ships can now complete fewer round trips per year. Think about what that means at scale. If a shipping line normally runs 10 round trips a year on an Asia to Europe service, Cape routing might cut that to 8 or 9. To maintain the same frequency of departures, they need more ships. More ships means more costs. More costs means higher freight rates. And higher freight rates mean higher prices for you. Fuel consumption also surges. A large container vessel rerouting around the Cape burns hundreds of additional tons of fuel per voyage. Crew costs rise. Port scheduling becomes more complex. Every extra day at sea adds to the bill, and someone always pays that bill in the end. Here's a concept that explains why this matters far beyond the shipping industry. Modern manufacturing runs on a system called just-in-time production. The idea is simple. Instead of stockpiling massive inventories in expensive warehouses, factories order components to arrive precisely when they are needed, not a week early, not a day late. It keeps costs low, warehouses lean, and production lines running smoothly. In this system, a container ship is not just a vessel, it is a floating warehouse. While that ship is at sea, the goods inside it are in transit, unavailable for sale, unavailable for production, essentially frozen in time somewhere in the middle of the ocean. When a voyage that used to take 30 days now takes 45 days, companies suddenly have 2 extra weeks where their inventory is at sea and unreachable. That gap does not disappear. It shows up on factory floors, in empty retail shelves, and in urgent calls to find alternative suppliers. The consequences are already playing out across multiple sectors. Take automotive manufacturing. A car assembly plant in Germany or the Czech Republic might depend on wiring harnesses, sensors, or electronic components sourced from factories in South Korea, Japan, or China. Under normal Suez routing, those parts arrive in roughly 14 days. Under persistent Cape routing, that lead time jumps to more than 30 days. Miss a single shipment, and the entire assembly line can grind to a halt. You cannot build a car without its wiring harness, no matter how many other parts are ready. Electronics manufacturers face similar pressure. Companies that planned procurement on 30-day cycles are now operating on nearly 50-day cycles. That extra 3 weeks of uncertainty forces them to either hold more stock, tying up working capital, or risk running out. Then there are industries where timing is everything. Fashion retailers ship seasonal collections months in advance, calculated precisely to land in stores at the right moment. A spring collection that arrives 2 weeks late does not just sell poorly, it may have to be discounted immediately, wiping out margins. Consumer electronics launches tied to product cycles face the same risk. And for temperature-sensitive cargo, pharmaceuticals, fresh produce, and certain chemicals, the longer transit time does not just add cost. It can destroy the cargo entirely or force expensive air freight alternatives that inflate prices even further. This is where it stops being a shipping story and becomes your story. When freight rates rise, and they have risen dramatically during past Cape diversions with spot rates on Asia to Europe routes spiking several times over normal levels, those costs do not disappear. They travel through the supply chain and land, eventually in consumer prices. Higher shipping costs raise the price of imported goods. Longer lead times force companies to hold more inventory, raising warehousing and financing costs. Production delays push delivery dates back, sometimes forcing expensive last-minute air freight. Each of these pressures feeds, quietly but persistently, into the prices you see at checkout. Inventory matters. Financial institutions now frame sustained Cape routing as a supply shock, structurally similar to what happened during the COVID era, port congestion, but potentially longer lasting because it is driven by geopolitics rather than a pandemic that eventually ends. And the Hormuz dimension adds a layer that makes everything worse. Hormuz is not just a shipping lane for goods, it is the artery for 1/5 of the world's oil supply. When that artery is constricted, energy prices rise. Rising energy prices raise the cost of running factories, powering trucks, and heating warehouses. The two crises are compounding each other in real time. Hormuz increases the pressure. The most important question right now is not how long the current crisis lasts. It is how long companies will wait before they stop treating this as temporary. Analysts warn that if Cape routing persists for 6 months or more, businesses will begin redesigning their supply chains around it. Network planners will build schedules assuming 50 to 60-day Asia to Europe transits instead of 30 to 40 days. Procurement teams will permanently raise their safety stock levels. Manufacturers will accelerate moves toward regional suppliers, paying more for proximity, but buying certainty. If this lasts 6 months, the incentives to redesign become real. That structural shift, if it happens, erodes one of the foundational advantages of hyper-globalized manufacturing: cheap, fast, predictable sea freight. The entire logic of building a supply chain that spans 3 continents depends on the ocean being reliable. When the ocean becomes unpredictable, the math starts to change. Structural shift is costly. In the 19th century, rounding the Cape was simply the only way. Then the Suez Canal arrived, and the world built its entire trade architecture on the assumption that the shortcut would always be available. 19th century choices shaped modern trade. Those strips of water are no longer reliably open. The megaships, now sailing slowly past the southern tip of Africa, are carrying more than containers. They are carrying a warning that the global economy's most critical infrastructure runs through some of the world's most volatile geography. And when both fail at once, there is no quick fix, just a very long way around. Like and subscribe for more.